Hi, I'm Belinda Quick. I'm one of the authors for the Well-Architected Management and Governance Lens. Today, I'm going to talk to you about how you can use the best practices we defined in order to build a cloud-ready environment. We've seen that from successful cloud strategies, they drive clarity for investment, they increase the speed to value for customers, and they include the people, processes, and technologies in order to assure that results are driven in an efficient manner. We've realized from customers advancing their cloud strategies and capabilities with AWS that they're addressing some really critical scale questions along the way. This is just a small segment of the questions that we've heard from customers looking to scale their capabilities with AWS, and there are a lot of other questions that also need to be addressed. It's from these questions that we began our journey when we started collecting best practices for how you can manage and govern on AWS. What we noticed is that based on the data from our cloud economics teams, we typically saw customers achieving a 19% reduction in their overall IT spend when they began with AWS. However, there was an even greater amount of savings that customers were able to achieve after they scaled with AWS. They even reached up to 42% of a reduction in spend per user when they grew with multiple applications on AWS. From this, we learned that as you scale with AWS, there was this inflection point of a greater cost reduction, and there were some key factors that we identified and a set of patterns from the other customers where we could replicate best practices. We captured those best practices in a document which became the foundation for the Management and Governance Lens that we recently published. We know that as customers migrate to AWS, there's value well beyond these cost savings. Typically, there's a substantial focus on cost savings at the outset, but we also know that the avoidance of internal infrastructure costs when moving to the cloud are really important, that there's also a broader set of more compelling benefits when migrating or building in the cloud. We found that beyond cost savings, customers found increasing benefits with staff productivity, operational resilience, and business agility. There are many stories from customer references in addition to these ones listed here that can speak to the value realization that comes with the ability to scale your cloud capabilities. We've noticed with the management and governance tools in AWS that we're always striving for a balance between governance and agility. When we talk about governance, it's not just regulatory compliance. It's governing with security in mind, operations as a focus, and making sure you're doing some effective spend management as well. And when you balance those governance controls with the agility, that ability to make sure that you have self-service capabilities for your builders, that you're allowing them to experiment fast and respond quickly to customer changes, that with that balance, you can have both an effective agility and control in place that allows you to achieve those more compelling cloud benefits. When we collected these best practices from thousands of customers that have migrated to AWS, we realized that they were creating cloud-ready environments. And we knew that this achievement of balance was done over time. When you start with an MVP or a POC, you're not getting all of the governance utilities in place at the outset. You're starting to build some MVPs of those along with your MVP workloads. You're then scaling those so that you can achieve greater migrations, and you're scaling them further so that you can do innovations at scale. For instance, when you start with a POC or an MVP on AWS, you're going to start with Control Tower to provision your landing zone, and you'll likely only have needs for some basic network isolation without the full network architecture you would need for a large scale or production workload. You may only provision identities to secure that specific MVP workload and remediate only with necessary incident management capabilities from your SecOps playbooks. You're going to have basic logging, but not the advanced logging that you may need in place for full production or migrations at scale. As you continue to use the power of scale from AWS, you're going to likely move into migrating a batch of applications either in bulk or individually, and you're going to start building new applications on AWS. We call this phase migrations at scale, where you're re-platforming or you're rehosting capabilities alongside building new ones. It's at this time you'll need to expand these capabilities, making sure to add further controls and guardrails from Control Tower to meet the needs of those new workloads and new accounts. But you're also going to want to start integrating with your ITSM solutions using AWS Service Management connectors so that you can enable any necessary integration into your existing change management or incident management modules. It's important to start thinking about operations at scale in this migrations phase. In future iterations, when you start growing towards further scale and innovation capabilities with your workloads on AWS, you're going to be likely adding interoperability for these management and governance functions as well. We typically see these including the addition of full sourcing, maybe from Marketplace or some other third-party distributor providers, as well as adding in the distribution management of infrastructure as code in a hub and spoke model. Alongside these, you'll put in some financial insights that you can carry across your functions that can help you operate the most efficiently. With each iteration and evolution of your management and governance capabilities, customers that created the cloud-ready environments grew their interoperability to gain the most insights out of these functions to help them migrate, operate, and scale in an efficient manner. The best practices we gathered in the well-architected management and governance lens provides prescriptive guidance for this pattern of achievement. You can see how this guidance helped customers to move faster through these phases with our recommended best practices, powered by both AWS and AWS partner solutions. In the management and governance lens, we provide the framework for you to set up your AWS environment, founding on 8 interoperable management and governance functions. When we talk about interoperability of these management and governance functions, we're not really talking about a tightly coupled architecture or something that's specifically orchestrated and automated from the outset. What we're talking about is just interoperability in a general sense. Maybe you could even use the word choreography of interoperable capabilities. What we really mean is the outputs of one function become the inputs to another. It's these essential 8 capabilities that we look at from different vantage points across how you work and move in AWS to migrate and create innovation capabilities. Within the lens, we define these 8 functions in detail, providing you with implementation priorities, along with AWS services and AWS partners that can help you achieve these. We collected these best practices from thousands of migrations and activations of customers. We looked at the patterns of what they did, and we understood that from those that were able to achieve that higher efficiency of scale, that they were really looking at just these 8 functions of interoperability in management and governance. When we talk about controls and guardrails, they were using them to set the appropriate levels of control across their AWS multi-account frameworks. We were looking at network connectivity, and we realized that the majority of them were implementing a hub and spoke model to allow for scale and efficiencies in operations. Identity and access management was provisioning the least privileged access that avoided overburdening operations capabilities at the same time. Security operations were fully in place. Security by design and security frameworks were in place as builders began their journeys creating applications and workloads with AWS. Observability was in place so that it wasn't just capturing specific metrics, but it was looking at aggregated capabilities so that they could effectively identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover from any security events. Cloud financial management is in place so that as they were building workloads, they were operating with cost transparency. The builders were empowered with the right information to make the decisions without going away from the enterprise constructs of what the right good financial practices are as you operate in the cloud. Sourcing capabilities were procured and distribution capabilities were enforced, where infrastructure as code templates or specific software solutions were distributed in a multi-account framework that was standardized so that builders knew that they could have the self-service access to the right tools, the right templates at the right time so that they could most efficiently operate their workloads. When we talk about these interoperable outputs, we talk about this output of one becoming the input to another. As an example, I worked recently with a customer who had identified that they were spending from their cloud and cost and usage report that they were using a 16 extra large instance where their CPU utilization actually only required a nano instance type. When they double-clicked on what was happening, they identified that this was a builder team that was using 16 extra large instances for development environments. They realized quickly by switching it out to the nano environment that they could achieve savings. But they didn't stop there. They took the outputs of that financial management information and made it an input to their controls and guardrails, and they changed the mechanism by which their infrastructure as code template for that instance was distributed. They used distribution capabilities to put in configurable elements into that infrastructure as code template so that when it was provisioned in production, it was constrained to only use a 16 extra large instance type. And when it was provisioned in a development environment, the only parameter available was a nano. The builders were then able to do what they needed to do in a self-service way, and there wasn't any upsizing or downsizing that was happening retroactively. They were proactively taking those outputs and operating more efficiently. We can see from another customer that I worked with recently, they identified that there was, by using infrastructure as code templates, an opportunity to self-elevate permissions. And when these infrastructure as code templates were being distributed, it was causing a little bit more of a security gap from what they had desired. Adding in permission boundaries alongside setting further observability and detective guardrails in place that would address any of risks for this happening in the future. They took the outputs of their observability functions, changed how they did their identity management, but also implemented those as inputs into controls and guardrails and distribution functions. They were able to take the outputs of one of these functions as an input to the other and achieving that interoperability that we've defined. There's many more examples like this. When we looked at these interoperable functions, what we also wanted to make sure we did is that we founded them on our AWS well-architected pillars, where the well-architected pillars address specific guidelines and best practices for how you develop and design your workloads on AWS. This management and governance lens takes a foundation of those best practices, looks at these management and governance functions, and helps you create cloud-ready environments. What we mean by cloud-ready environments is that they're migration ready no matter what you're migrating. Whether it's your first workload to AWS, you're migrating the ability to start building at AWS, or you're moving workloads within AWS. When you create cloud-ready environments, you're creating migration-ready environments that are scale-ready, they're optimized and efficient, and most importantly, they're innovation-ready, so you can increase that speed to value for your customers as well. When we paired out the management and governance lens, we identified the set of AWS services that could help you begin to implement these functions. We wanted to make sure that we also allowed for you to leverage familiar processes and tools from your AWS partners that you already have an expertise on. So in our paper, we actually outline the specific AWS services that are available to help you achieve these functions. And we also list out a set of partners that have demonstrated that they can integrate to the management and lens capabilities and functions. Many of these partners have capabilities that are available on AWS Marketplace, or they have solutions that start with AWS Control Tower in place. AWS Control Tower lets you provision a multi-account framework across AWS, and you can advance your implementations by looking at these familiar processes and capabilities and implementing them in an automated way. What's important here is that we can meet you where you are. The best practices we've articulated from the M&G lens demonstrate that the interoperability of solutions should work across the services and your chosen ISV partner. They're said differently, by leveraging your familiar processes and tools from AWS, you can start advancing how you do these capabilities and scaling them appropriately. If you have a set of expertise that's already embedded in a specific networking solution or a specific observability capability, you don't need to swap that out to an AWS service just to achieve this benefit. You should be able to leverage those services as best you can with the tools that you're familiar with. We've pre-vetted a set of partners here. We expect this list to grow and change over time. It's important to take a look back at our management and governance lens white papers and our tools and our capabilities that we've linked from our pages on this, so that you can understand if there's new partners or a partner that you're already working with that may also be aligned to these. You can also find some of these partners listed on our marketplace pages in AWS, and you can understand how they're grouped by these specific capabilities and how they can be provisioned in this management and governance lens best practice by starting with Control Tower and having Control Tower enable these other partner services as well. So let's dive deeper into one of these management and governance functions. When we think about how you can best implement our controls and guardrails, what we actually recommend you start with is a multi-account strategy. What we mean by this is that you're going to use a strategy to separate your workloads using AWS organizational units so that you can appropriately segment the right security capabilities and constructs around each of those workload types. You're going to separate your infrastructure capabilities from your primary workloads for your applications. In this, you're going to separate it further by the software development lifecycle that makes the most sense for your company. For instance, you're going to likely want to separate your sandbox capabilities from your production capabilities putting a network isolation boundary in between them, as well as using different controls and guardrails to make sure that as these accounts are being used by your builders, they have the right controls in place. You're going to want to then move and group security policies in a well-defined OU structure that matches that multi-account strategy. We have a lot of best practices published on how you can effectively group these, whether it be the multi-account strategy and framework that was published in a few re:Invents prior, or whether you use the security reference architecture that has further detail on how the segmentation of these OU structures can help you put the right security policies in the right places at the right time. You're going to want to make sure that as you begin using this multi-account framework, that you're using and starting with Control Tower from a management account. It's that management account that's going to provision these child or spoke accounts with a landing zone model in mind. What the landing zone provides is a capability to centralize logging along with centralizing an audit account, so that as each new child account is provisioned, it's automatically feeding the right logs into a centralized bucket and giving you the right baseline for your accounts for your audit capabilities as well. When you think about this landing zone and starting with Control Tower from your management account, this service allows you to utilize it alongside an existing organization. And you can start migrating your capabilities using Control Tower so that you can have the same governance posture across all of your accounts. Prior to Control Tower, we used to be seeing landing zones taking months for customers to deploy. With Control Tower, we are now able to see that they brought that down to just a couple of hours. It's these types of best practices that we describe in the Lens paper for you, so that as you implement each of these management and governance functions, you're seeing the right best practices to put in as you begin to think about and having migration and scale in mind. In some cases, in fact, Control Tower is able to be done in less than an hour to get that first baseline environment provisioned. These are the fundamental operational efficiencies that we want you to be able to achieve by using the prescriptive guidance from the management and governance lens. Once you begin using Control Tower, you're going to need a couple of other foundational elements implemented with each of your accounts. For that, you're going to use the AWS Control Tower customization framework, and you're going to add in these foundational capabilities in each of your accounts so that your builder teams have the right capabilities and constraints in each of the accounts they're using and each of the organizational constructs they're following with the right security policies embedded. When we talk about the interoperable capabilities of these controls and guardrails, the outputs of controls and guardrails are going to provide mechanisms for you to have across these other management and governance functions. But more importantly, the outputs of those functions are going to be key inputs to your controls and guardrails. As you can see here, we describe them fully in the paper about how you can separate using different network boundaries and have specific controls and guardrails enabled for those. You're going to add specific permission sets and have controls and guardrails around those. You're going to think about how you enable security operations so you can remediate and add and remove controls and guardrails that are creating security issues or efficiency issues for your teams. Across all of these interoperable services, you're seeing the outputs of one become the inputs to the other. The outputs of your observability function are helping you create new controls and guardrails, and those controls and guardrails are being enabled using your service management framework. There's many more of these types of examples we can dive into. In our best practices, we lay out how you can use AWS services to do this, right alongside how you can use your familiar partner capabilities as well. If we dive further into the next function, we can start talking about network capabilities. It's important to define your network connectivity early on in the journey, and particularly important as you begin to accelerate your multi-account strategy and deploy more accounts and VPCs. For the implementation priorities with network connectivity, it's important to think ahead about what your network design is and plan as best you can. We recommend you begin with planning your IPAM solutions. This IP address management and in this IP address space, you need to think about it with growth in mind. So to do that, you're going to begin by selecting a range of IP addresses that aren't overlapping with any existing ranges your company has or is allocated elsewhere. Ideally, you're going to allocate a large enough contiguous block of addresses that are subdivided by logical supernets that are aligned with environments, regions, and regulated workload type. For instance, your development environments would be logically separate from your production, And then you'd separate your regions and any workloads that require segmentation for regulatory compliance as well. This allows you to utilize combinations of detective and preventive guardrails to enforce the segmentation and allow you to apply security groups, NACLs, and firewall rules at a higher level. This becomes more efficient because you are cutting down on the number of individual rules that you need to apply. Next, you're going to need to design your network connectivity. We think of network connectivity in 3 different groupings: connectivity between your on-prem and AWS, connectivity to and from the internet, and connectivity within your AWS environment as well, primarily between your VPCs. For the on-prem connectivity, customers typically start with a VPN and either add in additional VPNs or convert to Direct Connect and add resilience and bandwidth as time, maturity, and requirements progress. Your connectivity configurations should be automated as new accounts and VPCs are added as well. The second grouping of network connectivity includes traffic to and from the internet. We see customers utilizing a transit gateway in a hub and spoke model with centralized internet egress and ingress VPCs. The third grouping of network connectivity is VPC to VPC. This again uses a hub and spoke model for the network design. New VPCs can be added as spoke entities and routing tables are associated accordingly. Transit gateways can be peered as part of the hub to permit the traffic to flow between spoke VPCs in different regions. The next implementation priority to consider is how you define your VPC endpoint and DNS strategy. The VPC endpoints allow for private connectivity to over 80 supported AWS services. Interface endpoints represent the large majority of the currently supported service endpoints compared to gateway endpoints and are assigned a private IP address within each of your subnets. You're going to deploy interface endpoints where appropriate across more than one availability zone for redundancy, and you're going to apply access policies aligned with your internal security policies as well. You should consider centralizing your interface endpoints in a shared regional VPC if possible to keep your costs under control. In fact, recently I've heard from one of our financial services customers that they were able to follow this guidance and save over $1 million annually. That's not a small number, right? But they did this by rethinking their network design and implementing a hub and spoke model for interface endpoints aligned with this guidance. As with all your network connectivity decisions, DNS strategy can also become more complicated without the appropriate planning of your AWS environments as they grow. It's common for customers to design hybrid DNS architectures that leverage their on-premise DNS infrastructure and Route 53 for any AWS-based DNS requirements. Lastly, for your network connectivity implementation priorities, it's important to establish network monitoring to meet your scale and growth needs. Each account and VPC should enable VPC flow logs to be collected in a centralized bucket for use with other log aggregation and analytics capabilities. Your VPC traffic mirroring can be utilized to capture a full packet details and replicate all the traffic to destinations of your choice. These are just a summary of the implementation priorities you'll find in the management and governance lens about network connectivity. And you can see in network connectivity, we've also outlined how they can be interoperable with the other functions. You're going to want to make sure that you're provisioning each network with the appropriate controls and guardrails in place, a specifically defined set of identity and permissions for it. You're going to embed integration with security operations, including playbooks and runbooks. You're going to integrate change provisioning and remediation capabilities for your networking capabilities in your service management framework. You're also going to complete observability with specific network logging and identification of any changes to the network based on the behavior captured. Networking components should be included in your total cost pictures when you start looking at cloud financial management. And you're going to want to make sure that your purchased third-party solutions or your custom-built networking solutions are sourced and distributed with the controls you created for your sourcing and distribution capabilities. When we look at these AWS services or any of our partner tools, we can start thinking about how we do gateway load balancing different from how we do transit gateway and SD-WAN solutions included therein. And it's important to understand that, again, you should leverage your familiar processes. If you're already embedded with teams understanding and having an expertise with any of these partner solutions, there isn't a need to hot swap it for an AWS service unless it's impeding your ability to scale and grow with AWS. If we dive into the next capability, what we're talking about next is one of the critical things for those management and governance functions is the ability to think through your identity capabilities. For the implementation priorities for identity, we first recommend that you centralize your identity provider. You're going to choose an identity provider and configure the federation using AWS SSO or one of our partner solutions. You're going to govern the creation, update, and removal of identity in conjunction with your HR processes as you centralize this provider. As an example, I recently worked with a customer who took an event from Azure AD changes to add or remove sandbox environments in their multi-account framework. They did this so that as each developer joined their organization, they had a sandbox ready to go and they were able to experiment and learn and create on AWS for themselves. That way they were ready to go when their workloads were starting to move to AWS and when they began to innovate further with the capabilities they had. This really helped them create a foundation of an innovation culture in their enterprise. The next implementation priority for identity is to codify and automate your identity artifacts. When you codify your artifacts in an infrastructure as code template, whether it be with CloudFormation or another one of our partner solutions like HashiCorp's Terraform, what you're really making sure you do is create a least privilege policy embedded in that infrastructure as code template. You're next going to start securing credential use. You're going to create temporary credentials that are used via roles. You're going to rotate those credentials using a secrets manager type solution. And you're going to restrict the creation of IAM users and long-term access keys. Lastly, as you prioritize implementing identity capabilities, you're going to review and refine these permissions continuously. There's tools for automated reasoning that AWS provides, like IAM Access Analyzer alongside Access Advisor or credential reports that you're going to want to look at and review to make sure not only that you've got multi-factor authentication for root and privileged roles in the right place, but also that you're identifying resources with shared external entities or unused permissions. You're going to want to do this continuously. It's not a once and forget type of capability. It's one of those ones that in order to manage and govern effectively for scale, you're going to want to make sure you review continuously. For interoperability with identity, what we're really looking at is making sure your network connectivity has the foundation for how you provide the isolation and boundaries and a data plane access for resources. Your security operations are going to look at using identity constructs to make sure that they are remediating identity and access incidents effectively. You're going to identify resources, policies, and procedures and make sure that they're included in your service management framework. So at 3 a.m. on a Saturday night, your service management teams are going to be able to effectively remediate security instances the same way as if somebody who originally developed it was on site during the week. This interoperability of identity capabilities is as important as interoperability across the other 8 functions. Just like the other 8 functions in our paper, we lay out how you can use AWS services and tools right alongside your AWS partner tools so that you're centralizing that identity provider so it works for your on-premise and cloud capabilities effectively. When we think about all of these management and governance functions, and we continue to go into depth in our paper that we've made available for you to review, and with some future tools that we're looking to create, what we're really thinking about is how you're progressing through using these capabilities with AWS. We look at these best practices and we've seen some effective patterns that you're getting started with a foundational set of management and governance tools. We see you start with network connectivity, identity, security, and observability, provisioning accounts from AWS Control Tower. You're then evolving those environments and those capabilities so that as you're beginning to work with migrations at scale, you're adding in service management and further operations and observability constructs. You're advancing the MVP product you had originally and advancing your management and governance capabilities. As you reach that innovation at scale time where you may be tinkering, transforming, or modernizing your workloads, you're adding the full set of AWS 8 management and governance functions that we've outlined in our paper, and you're making sure that they're interoperable so that you can modernize at scale. You're creating mission-critical workloads, enabling cloud financial management, adding and sourcing and distribution of software and best practices, and creating that interoperability and automation of all of these management and governance functions. Our well-architected management and governance lens provides these prescriptive guidance to our customers on how you can accelerate the value from these phases with the recommended AWS services and AWS partner services as well. As with anything, it's not a set it and forget it type of a promise. It's important that just like with any other agile environment, that you consider the insights you're gathering, whether it's from observability, cloud financial management, or security operations, that you are tuning the rest of your management and governance capabilities to become more operationally efficient as well. As you grow and mature your workloads with AWS, you'll want to address these same functions to mature and grow as well. This will help you make sure that you're migration ready, scale ready, you're operating efficiently, and most importantly, that you're innovation ready. As you can see from the conversation here and the best practices we've gathered, that by enabling these best practices and creating cloud-ready environments, you're going to be able to increase speed to value. You're accelerating your cloud migrations by following our best practices, learn from thousands of successful migrations and activation days. You're achieving visibility at scale. You're validating that the cloud services are deployed, operated, and managed according to the industry expectations and common regulatory frameworks. You're leveraging your existing solutions, which will allow you for a quick implementation of scalable and secure cloud management, removing the need for reinvestment. And most importantly, you're balancing that agility with governance. The M&G Lens provides you prescriptive guidance on how to reduce the friction between the ability to govern and the ability to be agile. You can find all of these best practices at go.aws/mglens. We welcome you to review these as well as review the implementation priorities that we've outlined in our paper as well. I want to thank you for the time you spent with me today. As with everything at AWS, feedback is critical for us. I invite you to make sure you complete the session survey and let us know how we did today. Thank you.